Hello and welcome to part 2 of a 3-part series regarding Azure Logic Apps and generative AI, calling the series Innovate, where you integrate. And today we're going to be talking about the RAG pattern. Now this is video 2 of a 3-part series. In video 1 I did talk about developer productivity and how we are infusing our AI, into our Logic Apps experiences to help with developer productivity. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about the retrieval and an augmented generation, the RAG pattern in Azure Logic Apps. So this is going to allow you to use Azure Logic Apps and some of our connectors to go ahead and build generative AI applications. And more specifically, in this case, we're going to see that RAG implementation. So let's go ahead, let's dive in. I hope you enjoy the content. Feel free to leave any sort of comments or questions. Thank you. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's get into this. Now, one thing that, something I've learned here recently is that there is this misconception that in order to use generative AI, that you have to build a new application and that AI needs to be the center of that application. And while that might be the case in many situations, I don't think that's always the case. And I certainly think when we think about integration, that the narrative can be different. And let's get into why I think that way. So consider the data that's moving through your landscape today. You may have data related to purchase orders, inventory, work orders, financial statements, customer service tickets, and obviously much, much more. Now, your organization feels that this data is so important that it needs to be shared with other systems. Hence, they've asked you or others to go ahead and to build these interfaces across these different systems. Now, one question is, how does a person gain insights on all of this data without large ETL or ELT programs? So I think we've probably all been there. We integrate all of these different systems together, CRM with ERPs, with work order management systems, with ticketing systems, and so on and so forth. And then what do you end up doing in order to gain insights is you now have to consolidate all of this data, and you end up doing like application integration on the front end and data integration on the back end. Now, I'd say one of the challenges with that is that tends to be a very rigid pattern. And it needs to be in many regards because of consistency. And you want to make sure that all of your data is joined correctly and lines up properly. Now, that naturally can be a little bit sort of challenging and expensive to go ahead and implement. And so I think for once, especially as I look back on my career, there's routinely this situation where people don't like middleware. They don't like something being in the middle. They feel it adds complexity. They feel that it's expensive. They feel that it's complex. And in some cases, they may feel that it's not reliable. But with your iPaaS actually being in the middle of all your transactions, you now have access to a lot of valuable information as you are essentially directing traffic. Now, in the past, it's just been very difficult to go ahead and reason on top of this consolidated data, but I think that's where everything changes. And that's kind of the focus of this particular video. So without question, business processes will be reinvented with AI. And we're going to build new solutions or augment existing solutions that just hasn't been possible before. And here's a few examples of those types or classifications of applications. Now, the one big pattern whenever you hear generative AI, you'll usually hear about RAG, and that's retrieval augmented generation. And what this typically does is it has two paths. You have the ingestion path where you've got some data or documents. You need to tokenize that document, basically break it up into smaller chunks, generate embeddings, and then go ahead and index and store those vectors. So that's kind of almost like, think of it as data prep. You're basically loading your data into your large language model. Then the next process is all about, hey, how do I use this data? How do I go ahead and retrieve or search for it? And that takes place through a prompt where you are expressing some sort of intent or utterance. And as a result, you hope to get a response back. And This becomes a multi-stage process where there's embeddings that need to be generated, a vector DB is searched, and then related segments and prompt are provided to the Azure OpenAI service, and we have a response that is provided back that hopefully is meaningful to us. So why Logic Apps and RAG? And I would look at this very much like, it comes back to why Logic Apps in my mind, right? So much like we have tried to democratize building interfaces and building integrations, we also have the opportunity to democratize how you build generative AI applications. And how does that take place? Well, in part, it takes place to our drag and drop designer and our connectors. And in this case, we've got the Azure OpenAI connector and the Azure AI Search connector. Currently, these are in Logic Apps standard. These are built-in connectors. Now, what do these connectors offer that you couldn't do otherwise? And I think it all comes down to this developer productivity and democratization of who can build these solutions. So what we've done as a team is we've taken an existing Azure samples repo, and we've basically recreated what that repo does. And we've done that through a couple workflows, 2 workflows. And these workflows leverage these building blocks that we go ahead and we provide. And so what you've got in the middle there is thousands of lines of code versus, 10 or so actions that take place. And so this is one of those things where, hey, generative AI has a lot of interesting concepts and, there's some learning curve involved in this, but how do I go ahead and do something quickly? And I think that's the opportunity. You should be able to get up and running with our sample within, less than an hour and therefore be productive from that perspective. So let's just take a quick look at the sample that I'm referring to. Now, the demo that I'm going to show you is largely based upon this specific demo or this specific repo. We've got Brian, who's an engineer on the Logic Apps team that's put this together with Parth, and this is going to be quite useful for you. I'll include the link to this repo in the description of the video, and you can go ahead and follow these steps. It'll walk you through how do you go ahead and take care of the prerequisites. So you need to be able to access an Azure OpenAI service. You're going to need to be able to go ahead and access an Azure AI Search service. It's going to explain to you how you go ahead and configure those things and what's the underlying dependencies. I'm not going to get into that here in this video, but this will be able to take you step by step. I was able to follow these instructions, right? And then there's a few different workflows, and what we've got is some parameters that you can go ahead and use and basically plug in different things like keys and URLs into those parameters and then be able to go and get this up and running quite quickly. So that I will leave you with, but that's kind of the basis of what I'm going to show you in the demo. Now, this was the demo that I did show at Integrate, and this is a demo I've used in the past, and I kind of did this deliberately. I've used this to demonstrate business process tracking because you can see here we've got a business process with multiple stages. We've got these handoffs. It lends itself quite well to business process tracking. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to go ahead and say, hey, how could I go ahead and infuse AI into this solution without reconstructing it? And that's really the opportunity here, is through the use of Azure Service Bus and Pub Sub messaging, I can go ahead and add essentially a subscriber to this, to the solution. And in this case, we're going to go ahead and consume when we've got completed work orders, and we're going to publish that information to the LLM. And then naturally, we can go ahead and query that LLM. So let's go ahead and I'll run you through a quick demo, and then we're going to go ahead and do some searches or retrieval on top of this data. All right, so let's start with a demo. I'm going to just kind of, to ensure there's no smoke and mirrors going on here, I'm going to, run this query. So you'll see this later on when we go ahead to retrieve data. But what I've got here is an endpoint, that's a Logic app, and I'm going to just ask, what is the case number where Greg Jones was the technician? And we'll go ahead and we'll run this, and we'll see, I don't know what the answer is to that question. So basically, Greg Jones isn't in the LLM, right? There's no information about a technician named Greg Jones. So that's great. So now let's go ahead and run through the scenario. We're going to start with the chatbot here. And I'm going to say, hi, and then say my power is out. Okay, now I'm just going to provide some details here. I'm logging in as a customer called Lydia, and I'll confirm that that is my site ID, my location, and I'm just going to say there was a big storm, a tree fell on a power line. Okay, now we've got a ticket, so case 1188. Now let's go over to our Power App, because now what we're going to do is we're going to dispatch that ticket. So if we look back at our PowerPoint presentation, we've just done this piece. We've now created a ticket, and through the world of integration, we should now have a work order created. Now what we can do is let's go ahead and take a look at business process tracking, and let's see if we have any records available yet. And sure enough, we do. So case 1188, that's the case that we're interested in. We can see we've got 2 stages that are complete. We can now go ahead and click into this, and we can see that we've got Lydia, right, case 1188, and we have a work order that has been created, but nothing beyond that. So let's head over to our Power App, and we're going to now go ahead and assign this case 1188 to a specific field technician. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the status to dispatch, and now we're going to go ahead and we're going to assign the technician of Greg Jones. So let's go ahead and hit update here. And what I've done here, I've just rearranged some windows here, but if we go back in and we're in our business process, we can now see that we've moved over to dispatched and that we've got a technician called Greg Jones. So that's cool. Now we're going to go ahead and just finish the job, right? So when Greg gets on site, there's a safety assessment that needs to take place. Now in this case, he's going to say the conditions are slippery and people need to be careful. Now we're not going to call it a safety incident because no one has slipped and fell, but if that did happen, we would go ahead and indicate that here. Now if we go back here, we should see that the work order, the technician's on site, and we can see that the updates are in place, so that's cool. And we will now just finish the job, right? So it's now complete. There was a relay that had to be replaced, and there was the material ID for it. We can go ahead and we can click on complete. Now if we come back over here, let's actually maximize this. We can see that, and this is in real time here, that the whole business process is being updated. And we will see there's one more step to go, and that's the publish to LLM. So that's kind of the most interesting piece here for this video, right? But I think obviously having the business process tracking is kind of a nice bonus here, because we can see exactly what's going on from that perspective. All right, so what happened with this publish to LLM? Let's go ahead, let's take a look at this particular Logic app. So this is the one that was inspired by that GitHub repo. I've got the 2 workflows in place, the ingest and the search. So let's look at the ingest first. And this is going to follow very much what you would have saw in the PowerPoint presentation, just around the various steps that are involved in it. You can see that it just ran. It took 6.3 seconds to complete. And what we've got going on here now in the sample message that you're gonna, or the sample scenario from GitHub that you see, it's got an HTTP endpoint, and it's gonna go like you pass in a document URL and it goes and fetches it. But it doesn't have to be a document. That's kind of another sort of key thing here, is I want to be able to go ahead and just pass in messages. And that's exactly what I've done here, is I've taken kind of this canonical message of a completed work order that includes a bunch of additional information, like is there a safety issue, is there the customer information, there's the work order, the materials information. So we've got all of this information, and we're going to go ahead and publish this to the LLM. And that's kind of what's going on here. We're going to tokenize the document, get the embeddings, and then index the document. Now, if we head back over to the other workflow, this is going to be our search workflow. And what we had done before, you saw this run behind the scenes previously when I tried to query about Greg Jones, right? We can go ahead and see that there was an inbound request, and the prompt was like, is there a case, what's the last case number for Greg Jones? And here what we're doing is some prep to be able to go ahead and perform the search. And then we're going to go ahead and get the embeddings, do the vector search, get the chat completions, and then be able to respond back to the caller. So now let's head back over to Postman, and here we're going to go ahead and call that specific workflow. Now you saw what was the difference before, right? There was no information about Greg Jones. But let's see what happens when we run this again, right? Case 1188. And that is, the case that we were looking at inside of business process tracking, right? If we come over here, case 1188. So, and there's no sort of like massive delay here either. Like this was a situation where, you saw me do all of these things. This wasn't like, like a day later, this data was available. It was pretty much instantaneous, which is pretty interesting. So that's one particular scenario where there's this Greg Jones and a technician, but also very important to think is I haven't done any additional training of this model that gives it context about what a technician is. So let's also take a look at some other scenarios. So now let's talk about safety incidents where the safety assessment includes slippery conditions. And if so, please provide case numbers and details. And so this is another situation where I haven't done anything special about training data around incidents. But here we can go ahead and see that there are some safety incidents where there is, a technician that has basically slipped and pulled a muscle in their back, right? So we can see that in case 1179. If we go to case 1173, we can also see that someone slipped on the sidewalk. So let's go back to business process tracking, and we can now, let's remove this filter, and let's find case 1179, and we can see that this was dispatched to Steve Smith. And in this case, we can see because there was a safety incident, we actually flagged that. We introduced statuses for business process tracking. So now we can call this as a failed business process because we have a safety incident, and sure enough, that's the data. So that's pretty cool. Let's take a look at another customer scenario. So previously I've had some work orders that involve my buddy John Levesque, and here we can go ahead and search for work orders where the customer's name is John Levesque, and here we've got a couple cases that are available to us. Now we could go into business process tracking, but I know that those values will be right, but this just is another sort of example of, we've talked about customers, we've talked about safety, we've talked about technicians, but I haven't had to do anything specific. I haven't had to be an AI genius to get this to work. This is the power of large language models. Now, one other thing is I don't have to just ask about the workflow specific or my specific scenarios. This is a general purpose large language model that's being implemented here. So it's being trained on a lot of historical data as well. And so here what I can ask is I can ask for any recommendations on how we can reduce safety incidents. And it's going to go ahead and give me some recommendations. This is not going to be based upon the data that I've pumped into the LLM. This is because we are using a general purpose large language model already. But this just kind of goes to show you that you can blend your corporate data with this existing data that's part of the model, and basically get the best of both worlds. Now, the other thing, even though I didn't go through this in a lot of details, I think it's an important consideration. I often get the question about, well, what about privacy? Or are you using my corporate data to enrich a data set? And the answer is no. Like, you have to go in and provision your own Azure OpenAI instance. This runs in your Azure subscription. This is not shared with other customers. So that's, an assurance that can take some comfort in, and just knowing that this is your data. You're able to sort of take advantage of public data sets and then overlay yours on top. But the opposite isn't true. Public data sets don't benefit from your corporate data. It's your instance, you own it, it's yours. All right, so that is the demo, and the biggest takeaway from that is go look for existing solutions where you've got valuable information that is going on, and how can you expose that information to your business stakeholders to drive some sort of value. I'd be willing to bet you probably have many, many scenarios in your enterprise where you can actually go ahead and leverage this pattern. And using the GitHub sample that I referred to before, you can get this up and running in probably an hour and make it your own. That would be my takeaway, my call to action is look at your inventory of interfaces. Where do you have some interesting data that you could actually expose to your business subject matter experts and actually drive some sort of an outcome. Now, one more slide just to talk about here. The connectors that I just showed you, those have reached general availability. So you can go ahead and use those in production. This is the Azure OpenAI connector and the Azure AI Search connector. Both of those are available. Here's the link. I'll include it in the description, but go ahead and check it out. Now, a little bit of a teaser for the third video. We're going to focus on Logic Apps as plugins, and in that video I'll explain what a plugin is and what is the opportunity, but that's going to be the focus of video 3. So thanks for checking this out, and we'll catch you later.